Hi everyone, and just confirm that I'm audible. Okay, yeah, great, I can see that. So, just going to bring up the timer so I don't fuck up. Okay, PY is exclusively in the chat. Pronouns again, he, him. I'm going to take you when I am ready. And please, if your PY is clarity, make sure that the PY that you ask is clarity. It's kind of deceitful if you say you want clarification and then you are asking a PY. Okay. I am going to start in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, off the top of my speech, I just want to note that this is an actor motion. So it means two things. One, it means that the benefits that each side wants to accrue has to be about the actor primarily. You can talk about how it might affect the church badly, might affect other people badly, but you have to still connect it back to this particular actor primarily. This is for opposition to really be careful as the sort of argument that they make. But then secondly, we have to prove whether this particular thing that we are actually saying in terms of benefits, in terms of principle or whatever, coincide with the interests of this particular actor at the end of the day. So as Prime Minister, who is Pope Francis, right? We think that Pope Francis is an icon and that has never been seen in the history of the church, at least for the long history that we in the 21st century know, because he's the Pope of the most controversial time for the church, where the church was faced with a lot of very critical decision and of self. They needed to think about progressivism, liberalism, and how that clashes with the conservative ideologies of the Catholic Church ultimately, right? But Pope Francis have proven that he's liberal and forward-looking with a lot of policy changes, like accepting gays and members of the LGBT community as part of the church. And he has also proved that he is not dogmatic to the secrecy codes of the church, literally, because like Catholic Church is highly conservative, but he was able to pass these particular policies ultimately, regardless of the dogmatic nature that the church originally have in and of itself. Meaning that this is a person that prioritizes things like virtue, responsibility, and obligation in and of itself, right? We think, therefore, that given that that is his personality, at least from the information that we can garner from the events that have happened in the world, right? We think that he's someone that would most likely want the church to be more accountable and largely reformed, and is also someone that wants to mitigate the bad perception of the church ultimately, right? We also think that just like every other human being of his high status in and of himself and of the sort of virtue that he holds, he will most likely be someone who wants his legacy to continue ultimately. Good. So what do we think, retiring looks like on our side of that? We think that he will most likely retire on the mandate of change and self-retribution of failure in terms of, holding accountable, the church members, the cardinals, and all of those particular individuals in terms of, all of the harms or all of the crimes that they have been accused of, i.e., sodomy, having children outside, and all of the bad things, abuses that they have actually ascribed to these particular individuals. Like this was very evident in the accusation of the Californian church, etc., that happened, and how the Pope Francis was crying about this thing literally. So we think that if he's going to retire, given the goal and all of this particular thing, he's likely going to retire on the mandate of that change and the fact that he's giving himself that retribution of failure in and of itself. Good. There are 3 arguments, therefore. The first one is this. We think that you most likely, by stepping down, Pope Francis is going to be able to tilt the possibility of achieving reform for the church. Notice that reform right now is largely limited in terms of the church. Is not being able to do a lot at the end of the day. There's secrecy within the church, dogmatic secrecy that is limiting him ultimately, which means that because we want to keep each other's secrets, or because of the hierarchy that exists within the church ultimately, right? Nobody wants to call out another person in terms of, ascribing retribution in and of itself, right? But notice that this is the way you get reform, by stepping down and retiring. One, because nobody would then be able to run away from prosecution or, this retribution ultimately within the church. Why? Because the highest person, the most powerful person in the church has already been retributed, right? So it means that it just opens up that particular question, i.e., if someone someone of his status can actually, accept responsibility ultimately. Who are you that you won't accept that same responsibility if you are someone that have been if you're someone that have been accused of any issue, etc., etc. But secondly, we think this is very crucial, guys. The next person that is most likely going to then become the Pope will be someone who will likely continue in the lane of what he's doing. Because there's a very important thing that we need to talk about here. It is highly possible that the cardinal, because the way the Catholic Church works is that they kind of vote for the next Pope, the cardinal, the internal conclave votes for the next Pope ultimately, right? We think that it's very important to make sure that all of the, liberal achievements that Pope Francis has done is able to be sustained ultimately. Like the next influential person in the church might be someone that is just far more conservative ultimately within the church. To ensure that this sort of thing do not happen and all of this progressivism and all of the good things that he has done is not repealed ultimately, there's a need for him to be able to skew the narrative such that the next person that is going to come have the obligation or there's an expectation on him to continue this particular thing in and of itself, all of the things that Pope Francis has done. But thirdly, you are now in a position to call out people within the church and hold others accountable. Because you are a pope, you still have all of the respect and power. And when you step down, you now have, given that you still have all of those reverence in and of itself, right? Because you retire as a pope doesn't mean people stop seeing you as someone that is powerful and that is ascribed to the church in and of itself, right? But you can weaponize that particular influence that you have garnered in and of itself to now hold people accountable and call out all of these particular issues and literally be a spokesman. There are two reasons why you cannot achieve this when you die. One, if you die, they just pick the next most influential person internally. But secondly, if you die, the dogmatism of the church still continue to remain, and then there's no way you are going to get all of these reform analysis that I've proven to you. Please make it quick.
He doesn't get to choose his successor. His successor is elected. So why do we have to run the risk of them choosing someone who doesn't support his ideologies? He's still young, he's healthy. Why can't he just forward them?
Didn't hear the first part of there's a need for like him is about what he wants. He wants his legacy to continue. He wants all of the good things that he has done to continue. I think he would likely want that. But notice that this reform gives him superficial benefits or supernatural benefit, what you might call it, because you are like a martyr, right? You are literally sacrificing yourself for the kingdom of God, right? The extent of analysis from opposition will be backlash. We think backlash doesn't matter. And still have all of the reverence in and of itself, largely. But secondly, you have always been progressive. So internal backlash and you're fucking up the church doesn't really matter to you. This is not the first time that they'll probably do that. But then lastly, your goal and virtue is far more important to you than the dogmatic reason for why other cardinals might want to shut you up. Last thing that I want to say with my final minute that my partner is going to talk about is this. Death is worse because you don't have the control over the critique and narrative that they are going to do about you. While you are alive, nobody is going to critique you because you are still the Pope. If you retire, you can be able to reflect back on the perception of people about you and make corrections, seek for forgiveness. We are very, very proud to propose.
All right. Thank you very, very much for that speech. Would like to invite the leader of opposition to begin the up challenge. Here.
Hello. Just wanted to confirm, am I audible? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I've already sent in a sign. There you are.
Oh, sorry. I just didn't see it. Okay, with that said, I'll be the POI preference again via the chat. Don't worry, I'll be looking. I'll try to take one at the 5th, preferably coming in from closing. But if they don't have one, then of course I'd be glad to take one from opening. With that said, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Our stance coming from opposition is quite clear. The Pope is more than just a religious leader. He is a beacon of unyielding faith and of dedication, and as testament to these values, needs to remain until the end. A few pieces of context that I think are going to be quite critical to my rebuttal. Number 1, note that the church is a largely conservative institution and that many bishops have already had a very strong pushback against the reforms of the Pope. In fact, the only reason they cannot hold him accountable is because he is the Pope. Secondly, is that just stemming from this, within the context of the church, we assume that because he is the Pope, he is correct on majority of religious matters. So only when you are the Pope do you have the ability to say that you are objectively correct because God gave you like the divine authority to say that something is right. What that means is, as the Pope, you have much more control over the discourse over any like other person. This is why even though the strong pushback against the Pope does in fact exist, right, there is not much that they can do to change what he is saying, to change what he is doing, because since he is the Pope, he has divine papal authority and he cannot be challenged. I think that these two pieces of information are very important just because of directly how they show that like their rebuttals don't really work. Number one, their last point is how outside of the church, the Pope can hold like other people within the church accountable. That is not true for two reasons. Number one, since he is no longer the Pope, he no longer has that papal authority, which means that he can't necessarily do that, because if the next Pope just says that, oh, that Pope is wrong, then congratulations, Pope Francis's word no longer means anything. But number two, I think that at the same time, if you are outside the church and you start to hold people accountable, then people are going to say things like, well, number one, you gave up your divine like position. Why do you have the right to hold us accountable? But number two, they're going to say that him leaving was like a show of the fact that he is in fact not committed enough to the faith, which is why he ended up leaving, even though he was like healthy and young enough to be able to pursue like these kinds of things anyways, right? And they can gaslight him into saying that he was in fact a bad Pope, nothing that he said really matters. I would posit that him leaving, given his positioning, is precisely what makes it bad if he leaves. Because if he leaves, right? Because if he leaves, then it's going to show all the more that in fact that the bishops who were pushing against him were in fact correct. He did not speak for God. He was only there for his agenda. I'm going to run two arguments in this case. All other rebuttals are going to be integrated. Number one, the papacy is not just a job, it is a spiritual vocation, i.e. a lifetime calling that embodies the very essence of faith and of devotion. The act of a pope, like being willing to die rather than retiring, is of course a reaffirmation of this lifelong commitment, which I think is something that is very, very important in the world that we live in today. How so? As a piece of context, more and more people are opting out of Catholicism, right? Which is why it is important that the Pope shows his commitment to the values, because he should want people to be as strong to the faith as he is. This happens, I think, in a few ways. Number one, I think that having this stance solidifies the principle of perpetual service and spiritual leadership, right? So it reaffirms the idea that the papacy is not a secular role wherein like hands always change, wherein values always change, right? So the continuity is like not just symbolic, right? It practically demonstrates the unwavering faith that Pope Francis always tries to speak about. And that is why, right, he puts money essentially where his mouth is, showing that he is firm in the faith, which is why other people should be, right? He never quit on the church, and neither should anyone else. But number two, think about this in the context of like the global community, right? In a world wherein leaders often come and go, leaving communities in a state of flux, right? I think a pope who serves until death shows a beacon of constancy and of dedication, which reinforces the church's role as a pillar in turbulent times, which I think again is important for the context that I gave, right? Moreover, I think it is also bad, and Pope Francis should know that there should be a precedent wherein the Pope is seen like as something that just can be given up, where faith can just be like given up. There was a previous Pope who already did it, and it's bad to show that this is something that happens over and over again, because this creates challenges in terms of instability after his reign. In particular, lad, if you set a precedent that the Pope can leave, now bishops are going to try to make actions that cause these popes to end up leaving, right? They're going to try to lobby for ways for people to quit. We think that is bad in terms of like political interest, in terms of political instability. You do not want to create uncertainty surrounding the papacy. I'll get to that in my second argument, right? But lastly, I think it's just important that the church remains very unyielding. Anyways, moving into the second line of argumentation, we agree that the Pope has been forwarding a lot of these like very progressive reforms, but we think that the only way he can continue to forward them is, of course, by staying within like his current position. How exactly does this happen? First, consider the structural nature of the church as being an institution steeped in like very old traditions, very old doctrines. It is very, very hard to get significant reforms in, and I think that Pope Francis is aware that he has been lucky enough as someone willing to push against some of these doctrines, to reinterpret some of these like doctrines, right? He is aware that he is very lucky and that this chance may not happen again. So by remaining his position, he's able to ensure that the values and the ways and his commitment to God is like able to continue pushing towards like these changes. But before I hit 6, is there a POI coming from CO? Sorry, CG. Oh, sorry, OG.
So you already agree that the church is largely conservative and is already facing pushback, which means that this Pope Francis is someone that is largely radical that wants change, right? He needs to make sure the next person is going to be as good as him. He's someone that is already old. He might die soon anyways.
Okay. But the process of electing a new pope introduces uncertainty regarding the continuation of ongoing reforms, right? Because each papal election, you don't know who people are going to elect. And I already told you a while ago that most bishops, in fact, do not agree with the way he is interpreting doctrine. What does that mean? It means that most bishops probably are going to be like, oh, yay, Pope Francis left. Now we can go back towards being conservatives. Unless you prove that most bishops are likely to elect an equally progressive one, it doesn't make much sense, right? Because in remaining until his death, this is the only way the Pope ensures that a stable environment happens because of his papal authority to ensure that these reforms take root and flourish, because he has that monopoly in terms of dictating what exactly is essentially correct, right? Because in matters of faith, he is correct, right? And a longer tenure allows him to in fact increase the ability for this to be accepted. Whether that's 1 more year, whether that's 2 more years, whether that's 3 more years, every additional year that he is there is an additional year for him to use that influence, to use that legitimacy to convince more bishops to in fact vote someone to be the next person. And in fact, by staying committed to the role, he shows them all the more reason to do this, right? Precisely because when he is committed to the role, right, he's able to demonstrate that he is in fact still one with the church and he's not willing to quit on it. Anyways, past 7, very proud to oppose.
All right. Thank you very much for that speech. Would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to respond.
Hello guys, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Exclusively on the chat, CO, you're awfully silent. I would like to hear from you. Yeah, but exclusively on the chat, regardless. Yeah. Now, Pope Francis is 86 years old. Is very old, which simply means his organ is failing. He probably is having old people sickness, and if he keep going on, he's probably going to have more sickness where that we know with old people not able to move a lot, less activity and the likes. It simply means even him being alive is not active. He can't be as active as he once was, and the likelihood that he's going to be active moving forward is less likely. But secondly, given that it's old, the probability of him dying tomorrow, next day, 500 years from now, is uncertain. But he's still going to die either ways. The question is, the next person that is going to take over him, which is hopefully going to be soon, probably next 30 years or 20 years or soon, right? Obviously, we're going to be conservative like they concede. The question is, how do we ensure that it's most likely going to be liberal, or to some certain extent, is going to have some liberal tenets? Because we can't fiat that it's going to be liberal. But what we can say is that the liberalism is going to rub off if that is going to be better. Let's talk about legacy. 2 things in my speech, that's all. Right? Why is this likely going to be more liberal? 1, by unique characterization of being a pope, you have preference shaping power. That is to say, you have the ability to shape people's mind, especially those cardinals you are talking about. Because you are not just anybody, you are Pope fucking Francis, who has literally changed the particular church, which simply means a lot of people look at you with reverence, even if they think that you make certain mistake. It simply means you still can actually shape the way they think, but also be able to have a say in the next person. Notice the counterfactual here is death. When you die, you have no say at all in the next person, and you can't shape anybody's preferences. But there is the second thing here. When you actually resign, what it means is you become a martyr, because people outside the church see you as someone who has resigned, who have done a lot of work, and they tend to evaluate that particular work, and especially all the characterization my partner tells you here is true. Why is this then likely going to get the next person is going to be more general? 5 things. 1, the social pressure by the masses is something that is going to be so huge, because no one has ever done this before. Everybody's going to come out, want to hear from you. Why did you do this and the likes? Simply means you can actually use this to air your view. But given that you hold out much power with the public, and given that the church obviously want to get buy-in, you most likely can shape preferences and have beginning power to shaping the next generation of leadership in papacy. Second thing is your donation. Your unique ability to do this is your unique ability to bring in donation, right? Secondly is acceptance and image laundering. Notice that Pope Francis is seen particularly as someone pure, especially with the acceptance of minority and a lot of people. So basically, it is trendy to see him as someone pure and the likes. It simply means that the church needs to do image branding because they have that particular incentive. And the best way to do it is using Pope Francis in this way. This is not to say it's definite, but gives you an incentive to say this is the likelihood why the legacy will happen. Notice when you die, the alternative and all the harms they talk about will still happen regardless. But the problem here is they have no say in what happens. So even if they say, oh, the next person is going to come and is going to be so wicked, we think that that happens to your side either way, right? That's that is not mutually exclusive. The question is, how do we have a say in the next, the next way? And I think this is the best way Pope Francis can enact his power. But before I go on, CO, go on.
Even if you're able to get a favorable pope in, that when back-to-back popes resign, it sets the narrative that popes can be removed. Why is it not likely that your next favorable pope can be removed and someone unfavorable can come in who doesn't agree with Francis?
So it can be removed, but he got in, but on your side, it won't, the person that can be removed won't even get in the first place. Look, the issue is, at the end of the day, you get your decision. But secondly, that's speculative, right? You can't react to that. So yeah, I don't care. Let's go to the second thing. I think this is the most important thing, and this is going to weigh off. Notice that this legacy argument take care of almost everything like OO talks about. But second thing about effect on papacy, I honestly don't care as for Francis, and I am just going to be weighing that particular impact with this second argument, which is uniquely important, and I'll get to it now. Why is death worse? The most important thing for Pope Francis in this debate is the ability for him to transcend his body and soul and go to heaven. Given that he believes that he's a spiritual being and being a spiritual leader, his ultimate goal, his whole life work is to make sure he gets to heaven. That is to say, the metaphysical benefits in this particular debate is the most important way up in this particular debate. Why is this likely? Because notice that if you go to heaven, you most likely are going to live there infinitely in terms of benefits. And obviously, if you go to hell, infinite punishment too. So it definitely, this is calculus then, and the most important thing to this particular actor, given that he's not just a man of the body, he's also a spiritual being, is the ability for him to go to heaven. We are the place, we are the person who is able to make sure that he has higher propensity of getting to heaven. Notice that your ability of going to heaven is possibility. So obviously, like there is a possibility of you going to heaven. It's not assured, but there are likelihood where you can get that assurance in our side of the house. Why is this like this? When you are the Pope, especially you are a reformed Pope like Francis, right? Nobody gets to critique you. Nobody calls you out. Nobody calls you accountability. Nobody tells you what you have done wrong. The unique thing here is the Pope realized that he is a human being, is not infallible. That is to say, he might have done certain mistake in the past or certain mistake at all, but by virtue of him being Pope, he won't have able to repent or do anything. The problem is when you die, you just die with that particular sin. Nobody gets to tell you, no discussion comes around it. Why is retirement important and better? People get to critique you, and all of them agree that there will be backlash. This backlash is good, because even if at the end of the day you realize some of the things you did is wrong, or the conservative niggas are right either ways, you get to do 4 things. You get to repair your particular legacy, you get to pray, you get to repent, you get to ask for forgiveness, you get to write your biography, write a book about, things you should have done, you get to give more to charity, you get to receive penance, you get to sacrifice the rest of your life in pleasing God and begging God, asking for forgiveness. This is the most unique and most important thing way up against, regardless of any impact they want to come about in opposition bench, because having a metaphysical benefit and going to heaven is the most important thing here. Notice anything CG wants to prove has to be preconditioned on this particular characterization my partner give you. But secondly, I don't think they can beat this metaphysical benefit. That's why we uniquely win from opening government. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that speech. Let's invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close up the top half of the debate.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Good day. I'm just checking if I am audible.
Yeah.
Cool. That's great. So, a few things before I begin my speech, some points of housekeeping. Firstly, no preferred pronouns. Secondly, hi, I'm Joseph. I'll take POIs in the chat box. Again, in the chat box. Don't arbitrarily unmute yourself so I don't get distracted. I'll take a POI for diagonal engagement from closing, so that's fun. I know this is a final and I want to turn my camera on, but sorry, my internet now in a hotspot is kind of wonky, so this will have to do. At any point I become inaudible or can't be heard, let me know, like turn your camera on or say something. So I'll assume I'm still audible. Starting my speech in a few seconds. Let me get my paper and timer. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus Christ told Saint Peter, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Newsflash, Saint Peter was the first pope in the Catholic Church, and since then did his best to carry that out, perpetuate ideologies, and remain consistent. We tell you that all the popes in the past who have resigned or retired for reasons outside health or other accidents have received taboo and stigma, which is why we think that it is not in the interest of Pope Francis, given that this is an actor debate, to be able to just resign and not stay in papacy until death. We tell you this is going to harm his legacy, and more than that is going to harm the Catholic Church, something which is the bedrock of what he stands for and is willing to die for. Before I move on to my extension, a few extraneous rebuttals against opening government in general. Firstly, they talked about how we want to be able to forward progressive ideologies and interpretations and challenge the old guard, these Catholic and conservative people in power. We tell you then, who is going to forward these ideas if he steps down? We cannot assume that the conclave of bishops are going to elect someone progressive or liberal just like he was, because my partner already characterized to you how majority of them within the majority are conservative and are unlikely to be able to forward his agendas. In fact, they raised the 5 dubia or 5 doubts against Francis. They literally wrote a letter with 5 debate-esque POIs, of which he responded with an LO speech clarifying progressive stances and modern-day interpretations of the church, something that would not be done if he steps down, if he retires for whatever reason. Secondly, why do we have to go through the hassle of all of these gymnastics for appointment? We can't risk it. That's additional bureaucracy we're not willing to do, the church shouldn't do, he isn't willing to do, and he can do it himself. There's no problem with that regard. So now they mentioned, oh, what happens when he dies, right? They mentioned how, oh, we might not be able to forward these ideologies, but I tell you, let's see, right? Let's deal with the problem when we get there. But every month, every day, every year counts that he's able to strengthen his foothold and strengthen the modern day interpretations and more progressive stances against minorities, against the LGBT. He is an ally. And every time he is still there is a win for them and a win for the church, given all of the flack that the church has experienced with the Crusades and all the shit that happened with all these scandals and controversies. We don't want him to backpedal on the progress that's happened. Now, they gave this strange assertion, right, about talking about, oh, it's bad for the branding of the church because it's no longer going to be progressive or liberal. How exactly will this be better if he resigns, right? That's a contradictory characterization. It's not going to work. What is my extension? 2 things. First, I'm going to talk to you about the negative stigma that exists when you retire and how this is seen as taboo, and ultimately, this is going to destroy the reputation of Pope Francis. We need to take a look at the nature of papacy and how this is for life. You are appointed by the conclave of bishops. This is a social contract and construct you subscribe to, they subscribe to, the church subscribes to. We think that you must serve for life, and sure, only in extreme cases may you resign or retire like what we saw in the past. If you become paralyzed, a vegetable, or if you get into a severe case of dementia and become senile. Newsflash, ladies and gentlemen, Pope Francis is old, he might move a bit slower, but he is mentally stable, active, and healthy. In fact, recently, he spoke about his health condition. The dude has a problem with his sciatica. He has a pinched nerve. It's a chronic nerve condition. It is not debilitating or life-threatening. It doesn't harm his ability to make cognitive decisions. He's all good. Sure, he might need to rest a little bit, not walk too much, but it is fine. He does not want to resign. It will be against his interest if he does. We tell you that the harm that you get from government rhetoric is that we don't want popes to resign on a whim due to peer pressure for no reason. This harms and damages his legacy, and we don't want the masses to do groupthink and weaponize the power of Pope, using him as a socio-political battering ram to forward change and agenda just because they want to. The harm here is that it becomes tokenistic, and that is a disgrace. Besides, why would anyone listen to a former pope who turned his back on Catholic ideology and turned his back on divine responsibility? It doesn't increase his influence, it harms it, and ultimately, even when he dies or even if he steps down, is worse off for him, an impact you get from it, partner. Now, really quickly, right? Second argument. Serving until death is modern day martyrdom, which is something good for Pope Francis. We tell you that being the Pope is not like being voted president or being hired as a CEO or board of directors. It's more serious. It's sacrosanct. There are sacred nuances since he is a representative of God and he has the highest authority in the Catholic Church. This is not in his interest because he doesn't want to do it and he believes he can still carry out the authority and word of God as he's doing in his papacy. He's still able to celebrate Mass and carry out other sacraments in the Vatican, and he still is able to forward progressive and modern day stances and interpretations, strengthening the alliance with minorities like the LGBT in his response to the Five Dubia, the LO speech and article he gave when the conservative popes and cardinals, or bishops rather, challenged his authority. The Pope represents God and the stability of the Church, and if he dies in his post, he becomes a martyr. Ladies and gentlemen, this is parallel to what happens to soldiers and police in the battlefield who die on the line. Even if they're old, even if the generals are unable to fight, they're still putting their foot forward. And we think the Pope is more than an agent of the state. He is the highest authority of the Church, and for all these reasons should remain in his post, stand for the ideologies, and continue the good fight. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose. Hear, hear.
All right. Thank you very much for that speech. And that ends the top half of the debate. In order to begin the bottom half, we'd like to call on the member of government.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
All right. I to unmute. I'll be taking one from opening, if not closing. But before that, I want to say a quick shout out to my teammate Arya, to our coaches, and to people who have been supporting me that we came to this final round. Yeah. All right. Oh, also, if my mic become like faded, please tell me and cut off directly because this happened in round 5, sorry. All right. three clarifications to clear up the debate. Firstly, we think that the first concept you need to understand is that Pope Francis is literally old and sick. So all cannot assert that he is healthy just because he says so. He's literally in his 80s. He can even barely walk and stand for extended period. He's often seen is using wheelchair and often aids at various events. They even had part of one lung removed due to an infection. This means that serving actively as a pope is not the best interest of him and not the best to ensure his legacy in case of sudden demise. In CG, we're going to provide you two extensions. Firstly, why Pope Francis got much more happiness in his old age. This is crucial because this is an actor emotion. But secondly, even if you don't buy that, we're going to give you 4 new mechanisms to prove why retiring is the only way that you can leave institutional legacy and ensure that it's the right replacement that continues the values that you have been fighting for, that it has been your identity for long. OG unasserted this. This is why we think that OG case is unrealistic, because we think that their burden is astronomical if they want to prove they can simply retire but without any mechanization to do so. Second context, we think that the retirement of Pope was not the first time. This already happened before with Benedict XVI, and it's why when he is being actively criticized because in his church, for example, this is currently in the same position as Francis right now. This is why we think that retiring process will not be as complicated as all want to portray. Thirdly, we think that even if you have absolute power as church leader, it doesn't mean that there's no oppositional. This is that people, Pope Francis is going to face them every single day at an attempt to reform church, and this is why we think that is going to affect his happiness in the first place. We think that briefly on all case that they say that it's because of his spiritual vocation and obligation to stay in power, but it is not true, because in cases of Benedict XVI, he felt that even in his in power, the God has left him and caused him to suffer. This is why he chose to retire, because he already lost that spiritual meaning when they're constantly failing God, when they don't able to reform or don't able to create any sort of changes in the first place. We think it's also likely to happen to Pope Francis. Secondly, we think that what happened here is that on opposition, even if you wait for you to die, there will be no significant change that can be there just because you are being the Pope. Example, because there are many oppositional that comes against you, and there are already many conservative Catholic Church that not able to change, even if they're thirdly, we think that also likely to weaken the Catholic Church. Therefore, it's okay to show that the conservative is not the one who's going to dominate the church. Extended on CG, two things. Firstly, on the less happiness. Within an opposition, you have less happiness for 3 structural reasons. Firstly, because you're constantly being condemned. You're going to be directly harmed exactly because you're constantly being opposed, you're being criticized. Imagine being an old pope that you have constantly be at war with the institution they're supposed to lead and you're supposed to have authority to, but because you want to reform them, they are the one who is already failing you. They're the one who already beyond your control, and that's why you want to retire, because you feel that they're unable to change the conservative and also the oppositional party that becomes stronger as you go to want to reform this institution in the first place. But secondly, being a pope is draining. After you sick, you still need to have the responsibility of papacy. You need to go to visit and many places in church, for example. You need to sign many documents. You need to control many, for example, like the cardinals or bishop, for example. This is why we think it's very draining emotionally and also emotionally and also physically. We think it's very uncharted. This is something that is likely to make the Pope very unhappy in the first place. But also thirdly, this is important, the moral guilt. The longer you stay in power, it means that you have more obligation to make sure you're likely to reform the church. It means that you as a person, for example, you feel that you have the influence and power, but you still cannot change anything except for making yourself to look more populist. Like, look, even if you want to stay in power and constantly goes and have to backlash your value as a pope because you have to stay in that kind of institution, it's going to make you day-to-day suffering. And the limited time you have as you come as your old age, it means that every day you're likely to question yourself whether you are actually making the right choice by staying in power. The thing here is that this is far more eating away at Pope Francis more than condemnation and also the backlash likely to happen opposition when they step away. The reason why you actually have to face this daily basis is likely to eat away on your happiness, and it's why it's very harmful. But practicality, if you don't want to buy the happiness is important for the Pope, within that the second extension is going to win us this debate. Within that, Pope Francis will get assurance of a suitable successor who can continue his legacy by retiring instead of dying. That's going to mechanize more than OG. I want to know that is the most important contribution in the round for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it's going to be the most realistic depiction of the interest of Pope Francis. Secondly, if OG asserted that you can find replacement, but there are no mechanism whatsoever, this is why we're going to already over the opponent benches. But no, this is an alternative argument. If you don't buy the main interest of Pope Francis is personal happiness, we're going to prove that even if you don't care about being sick and only care about legacy like all want to portray, we prove that you realize the other interests better. In CG, we explain structurally why it's the case, right? Look, this is the selection of how a new pope goes. When the papacy becomes vacant, whether, for example, die of old age or reclaimment, like what happened in Benedict XVI, this means that a conclave is going to be convened. This means that there are four mechanisms that don't exist on OJ that CG is going to talk about. Firstly, before he is dead, it means that Pope Francis can elect and appoint a significant number of cardinals who will be voting in the next conclave that reflect his own theological and pastoral priorities, making sure that the electors are likely to share many of his views and values. This is something that can only exist when he retired and not because he died. This is what happened with Benedict when he like picked the people who want to pick Francis as his successor. This is an authority that is owned by the Pope that can uniquely exercise when he is still alive, as opposed to unexpected demise that happen on opposition when you wait to die. This is why with you cannot change the composition of cardinals. This is why you have no opportunity for the Pope to adjust or influence it at all. Secondly, even if you don't buy that, by retiring, within that Pope can ensure that his resignation comes at a time where his policy and vision are still actively shaping the church direction. This momentum can influence the cardinals to choose a successor who aligns with these ideas. In comparison, in case of opposition, the emotional and organizational turmoil that follows a pope's death could lead to more reactionary decision-making in the conclave, potentially diverting the late pope's vision. Thirdly, in the degree of control, when he's alive, it means that it can constantly communicate his vision and priorities. This continuous exposure can influence the perception and expectation of both the clergy and also the laity regarding the future direction of the church. The degree of control doesn't exist on their side of the house because they cannot continually communicate and reinforce his vision because he's dead. Furthermore, within that, Pope Francis can also appoint bishop. The appointment of bishop that can share his vision in a way that it can also influence the future direction of the church. It means that they're likely to play a crucial role in shaping the local church status and also can influence the broader discourse that happen within the church itself. When you suddenly die on their side, the existing hierarchy remain as it is, and any planned further appointment or any strategic shift is in terms of bishop level cannot be realized. I want to note that OG never discussed any of these mechanistic regarding on legacy. Therefore, you cannot credit assertion CG win in this debate.
Right. Thank you very much for that speech. We would like to invite the member of opposition to begin the closing opposition case. Sorry, are you here, Emma?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Just a minute, I'll just set my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, during the whole course of the opening half debate, if we replace Pope Francis with Pope Mike, none of the arguments would even change slightly, right? So this debate is not about we debating that, a random Pope is going to retire in a random year. This debate is about Pope Francis retiring in 2023 or 2024 early, right? So this basically is the primary difference that we are going to create in this debate, right? So I'm going to talk about the two things that matter to Pope Francis in a very high regard. Number one would be his personal legacy that he leaves behind and why that's important. In this point, I'll talk about that. What will he be remembered for if he lives on and if he retires right now? And in the other point which I'll talk about is what will he be celebrated about, which is also very important when we take into regard the entire history of all the popes that have been there, right? In my second point that matters to the Pope and which is the primary stakeholder, which will be about his personal beliefs and the issues which he's rallying about right now in the current paradigm, and why it is extremely important to him that those are upheld and those are incorporated in the current church systems and how the church works, right? So these will be the two things. And in this personal belief that he wants to be upheld will be the climate change for the which he's rallying for, which he terms as Laudato Si. And the number two would be the issue which he rallies for in terms of modern family, remarriage, homosexuality and all these issues, right? So these things will be the primary importance and what his takes are, right? So let's start about what his personal beliefs and are in terms of and what are the issues he's currently rallying for. Number one being climate change and environment, right? For the first time historically, the church has taken a stance on these issues and it is going to be added to the core issues of the church, right? This has never happened. Point to be noted. Now, he also led the Paris Agreement in 2015, including also giving a speech in the UN about the climate change and environmental issues, right? This has shaped global discourse on these issues. And now, let me tell you that why these issues, along with the family issues that I mentioned and I dive deeper on later, these issues are extremely important for the church to stay relevant in the time. This is a time for crisis for the church, and now these issues are which the church, the stance on these issues for the church will be extremely important for the times to come, right? So this becomes extremely important for Pope Francis also, for the legacy that he'll leave behind and will be remembered for, right? So continuing my point, he has to stay deeply adopted. He has to stay and fight for these issues to be deeply adopted in the church, and this objective which he has, the core purpose which he's fighting for, is still unfulfilled, and this purpose and dedication is very strong, which he's very resilient about, right? And the second issue which I'll talk about and I'll link the two later on is the family and remarriage, right? Monash Letitia, if I'm not pardon if I'm pronouncing it wrong. But these issues, the family remarriage and his famous remark about who am I to judge about homosexuality, divorce, remarriage, and all these things is also very unique to him and is being celebrated about him. People are backing him right now for the stance which he contains on these issues, right? He also rallies about a more inclusive church in terms of these issues, and he's continuously now I'll combine both the two issues, the major two issues which he's rallying for currently. Now combining those two, he's continuously organizing large meetings of all the bishops to convince them that these are the really important things which the church should care about right now, and these are the fundamental things which is extremely important to the world and the Catholic Church also, because this is what symbolizes the modernism which the church needs to adopt in order to stay relevant, right? Now we also tell you that if he resigns, if he retires, all these policies which he has brought to a midway to completion will be remained unfulfilled, right? And since another important point to consider here is that in his regard, none of the bishops which are there is almost complete, is far from as complete to be ready as to rallying these purposes. They are still on the latter side of the conventional paradigms where church has to be an orthodox body and it should not have an opinion on these topics, right? So he is of not regarding, feels that nobody is ready, and he is very determined. More importantly, he is very determined and he has a clear purpose in mind. Now let me tell you that this purpose that this Pope Francis had a very obvious links to all the historical popes which have lived on to until death to fulfill their purpose. Now this brings me on to my second point, which I will start about. But before that, one last point is that this is a really bad time because the church is in an existential crisis where it needs to stay relevant, and this pope has taken on to this purpose, right? Now moving on to the next point in terms of why his personal legacy is important, right? What will he be remembered for? This is these are the core human motivations, including that for a church also, right? And what is his contribution? What will he be celebrated for? So these 2 points, including what his personal beliefs are and are they upheld or not, and his personal legacy, what he leaves behind. So bring me on that point. So this was slightly discussed in terms of how living on and continuing to be a pope until death is a testament to your lifelong dedication, and it symbolizes your authenticity as a pope. This is extremely important in the Catholic Church. It's a spiritual symbol, more important than any pragmatism which the government tried to rally about, but is absolutely false from the perspective of a pope, and it's really important, right? So it's like a profound expression of faith and service. Now the role, if I give an analogy, the Catholics regard as a shepherd who does not abandon his flock in times of crisis, right? So it's like a clear analogy, like how the Catholic people regard in terms of Pope retiring early, right? So let me give you an example, but for that I'll take a quick POI.
your case is not connecting. All the good things he has done as the Pope is still according to him when he retires. The most important thing
I
is his
got your point. I
spirituality
got your
and his
point
legacy.
clearly.
We have shown you
So,
how it needs to shape the future.
yeah, so clearly, right? So, like, if according to you, he will still be remembered for the job that he has done in terms of that. But let me tell you, like, even if I remember, like, this is also not valid, but because he'll read the task midway. And secondly, the thing that I stated in terms of him being not regarding any of his successors or possibly who could succeed them, any of them to be ready enough to rally for this is really problematic. Now, adding on that, all the previous popes which have lived on until death have a clear purpose in mind. Like this pope has, climate change and family inclusion. The Pope John Paul II had a clear purpose of promoting human rights and corruption. That's why he lived on until death, until it was fulfilled. And Pope Paul VI also had a clear purpose of dialogue with the other Christian denominations, right? So all the popes which have lived on until death had a clear purpose to fight for, and this pope clearly has one. So it couldn't be more clear that a purpose, a sense of purpose is the core job of pope, which he has to be remembered for. He has to accomplish something. It's like for the Catholic, it's like Jesus has appointed the papacy. Like it's regarded as Jesus made the papacy to carry on the church, to care for the Catholics. This is a clear memoir for that, right? So it's very clear that in terms of personal legacy and personal belief being upheld, these two being the two major factors for consideration, it's really important, and we clearly show you why it's really important in the debate. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that speech. Would like to invite the whip of government to summarize the gov case.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Right, cool. Thank you. Before we start, quick shout out to Joseph, my teammate. Absolutely joy to have this run. Also shout out to everyone who supported us, coaches, friends, and everyone. Right. POI preference to unmute. Gender pronoun he, him. Please refer me as GovWeb. There's a huge hole in the case of opposition because they assume that the more this Pope Francis will likely to reign equals good quality. This is not the case. Important framing. This is an actor motion that captured the interests of Pope Francis. What are those? He doesn't want the Catholic as ruin on his hand, and he wants to be happy. Let's prove, firstly, why prolonging the reign will increase the likelihood of this nightmare will happen. 3 things. A, currently there's a declining of the church and it's worsened day by day. This could only be changed if there's a change within the Pope itself. But I think secondly, I think my member already explained beautifully how physically he is sick and he cannot do the duty of being Pope, like going to church or maybe leading the prayer, etc. This creates the declining of the church worsen day by day. But I think thirdly, those sick affect the ability of you as a Pope to make rational decision within the church. Even now, there's a lot of statement and choices that were made by people around the Pope itself, not by the Pope Francis itself. That is why prolonging the reign doesn't equals quality, but we prove to you why this will likely to be worse. This shows to you there's an active harm if you want to prolong it. But the most tangible harm is flipping OONCO case, because people will remember the last impression that you gave. Exactly when you make it worse, you make the backlash even worse on your side of the house because you let the religion crumbles in the hands of the Pope Francis. The framing is so important because the comparatives when you are retired, you are relieved from those obligations, and this is the way for you to actually be happy. CG takes this debate. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to weigh why we are above our opening and the most important government bench contribution. What OG told you? 2 things. 1, they told you that we need to find a liberal successor agenda. Secondly, that we can go to heaven of following the obligation of the people. How do we outweigh them? 3 weighings. A, I think CG is the only one who recognized how you will likely to get a successor. We answer the likelihood of their benefit. That is why you should credit the points to closing government. And I think that OG is contingent all of their benefit on Pope finding the liberal successor. We provide to you a more broader and more independent benefit to not make the Catholic crumbling in your hand. But what are the mechanisms? I want to highlight because this is so important. 4 things. Firstly, I think before he died, Pope Francis can elect and appoint a significant number of the cardinals who will be likely to voting in the next conclave that reflect his own theological and the pastoral priorities, making sure that the electors like to share of many his views and his value, right? This is exclusive because I don't think the POI coming from opposition is true that he cannot do this. He can do this because this is an authority that is owned by the Pope, and he can uniquely exercise it when he is still alive and has he as a Pope, right? Because he is the absolute truth in the Catholic Church. This is why he can do this. But I think secondly, Pope Francis can assert that his resignation comes at a time when policies and visions are still actively shaping the church direction. This momentum can influence a lot of cardinals to actually choose the successor who actually aligns with these things. This means all of the successor will likely to align with the ideas of this particular Pope Francis. But I think thirdly, there's still some degree of control when he's still alive, right? Pope Francis can still like criticize, can still make sure that what is the direction of Catholics still in the eyes of the Pope Francis within himself. But I think fourthly, furthermore, I think Pope Francis can appoint a lot of bishops. The appointment of bishops, sure, he can like share his vision to make sure that people can still remember Pope Francis as something that is very, very influential, right? The reason why this mechanism is so important because the prerequisite of OG's benefit is clear in closing government because we mechanize how Pope can still influence after the retire. On the comparative, on opposition, you cannot do this because obviously Pope Francis already died when you want to do that, and you're just relying on the chance of you having a liberal successor, which I think is very, very unlikely and very, very risky. But second way, I think we shows to you that if you are not retired, there's an active harm of moral guilt. This is more important because in the absence of this, it's incredibly bad and why we make more urgency for you to actually retire in the first place. But I think thirdly, I think we engage better in opening opposition and CO concern about image because we analyze and flip how do we likely the backlash will likely to worst on opposition. On that three tipping point, OG should ask debate and closing government is above them. Secondly, let's engage the entire up bench. First thing, I want to flag that CO is very derivative towards their opening because all of their silver bullet is how the longer the Pope reigning equals good progression. And Pope have very great ambition to fulfill their purpose. This is already debunked by my characterization of by prolonging it will likely to worsen the condition, especially when he might be God in rep in church, but when he cannot change the base of individual persona, he needs to be retired by preparing the future church. We also told you that it is not retire suddenly having those particular purpose. He dedicated all his life to serve to God. It's already enough for you to do that. But to engagement to their case. A, when they say if opt out, this means it's going to be a lot of backlash from the conservative. Three response. A, this is factually wrong because I think the other Pope like Benedict already retired, and I don't think the backlash is actually that harmful for the Pope Benedict to begin with. But I think secondly, I think that is very unlikely for that to actually happen to begin with because as we speak right now, the image of the Pope is actually very good. I don't think the last impression that Pope will get is bad because he still get those recognition of those good things that he has done, right? We shows to you that this harm is actually not significant at all. But I think thirdly, the comparative is worse on their side of the house because what is the last impression that people feel when you leave them as a Pope, when you make sure you're still a Pope until you die? This flips the case of opening opposition and CO because talking about best stigma because we prove to you why the stigma is worsened on their side because your performance as Pope is worsened day by day. That is why your impression is worsened day by day, and you make those backlash even worse on their side of the house. That is why on those particular regard we still win. But I think second issue, talking about if they say that Pope need to be as long as possible, on their side Pope will live on their side the Pope will live anyway. The question becomes how do you ensure that it will be good in the future? A, your successor is somehow still aligned with the interest of the Pope. Let's illustrate how the election will happen on both sides. The context is Pope Francis is the first Argentinian people to become a Pope because exactly Pope Benedict retired. How then this affects the future election? A, Pope Francis can choose the actor. My member explicitly told you four mechanisms why Pope Francis can do that. But secondly, on their side, on our side, for the successor is even more liberal because it creates a fairer competition. This means more minority can be Pope on our side of the house. The comparative is on their side, you will likely to regress and you will likely to go back to square one with the elitist cycle of the Pope in the future. That is why no progression happens on their side. That is why it's incredibly harmful, and if you don't retire, and it's incredibly important for you to do so. That is why on that tipping point, there are three weighings that you should take. A, we prove to you there's a huge moral guilt on opposition bench, because when you don't retire, you make your impression as Pope even worse on your side of the house. Secondly, we prove to you our mechanism is the only one that ensure the prolonging of the liberal agenda still exists, because we prove to you how you will likely to have other control to actually make sure the agenda of liberal is still rising. Thirdly, we prove to you we shift a lot of trend and expectation of Pope should be until their death. This means the future Pope will have less mental burden under outside the house. The tipping point you should take, Judge, is we win on gravity of happiness and we answer the spirit of the motion, talking about the interest of the Pope itself. We took this debate.
All right, thank you very much for the speech. And that wraps up the Gov side of the debate. We'd like to invite the Chief Whip to end the entire debate.
Hi, am I clearly audible and visible? Hello. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the. Okay. Cool. So before starting, it's the final. So thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. It's been good to debate with all of you. And best of luck, everyone. So before starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and start. And it's really funny that even after Ankit telling that they could replace Pope Francis with Pope Mike and all the arguments be true, the Gov whip comes up and again does the same thing, where he does assumes Pope to be a general person, a general Pope with general abilities and general institute. So I'm going to do 3 things in this debate, right? I'm going to first take out CG from the debate. Then I'm going to explain why, irrespective of every other team in the debate, CO independently wins this. And then I'm going to take OG and O independently out of this debate, right? So let's first take CG out of the debate. CG has just 2 arguments, and I'm going to counter them both at their best case, right? The first argument is Pope cares about happiness. You won't be happy if people are facing backlash against you. You won't be happy because you're unhealthy. You are facing criticism. Panel, none of this really matters to him. Like the whole concept of spirituality, the whole concept of Christianity for a Pope is that hardships, be it physical, be it mental, be it backlash, are a part of your spiritual journey. That is what Christianity doctrine says to begin with. So for the Pope, it doesn't matter how much backlash he faces. For the Pope, it doesn't matter as much how much health issues he faces, because for him, the only thing it matters is if he can fulfill his unique desires in this debate, if he can fulfill the one thing he really stood for in his life, which makes him different from every other Pope who has ever lived, which gives him a legacy which is everlasting in this debate. So they are really out of happiness. The second thing in which directly counters OG and CG both is that somehow the other Pope would be elected and that would be very favorable. Firstly, that won't be the case, right? But secondly, they say that you can elect the board members who will select the Pope, and that's why that is the magic mechanism for this to happen. 5 reasons it won't happen. Panel, we are talking about the Pope, not someone who cheats, right? This Pope has high spiritual ethics. Number 2, the whole process of selection is deeply governed by the Aristotelic law, right? There's a proper law of how board members are selected. The Pope won't violate those laws. This is not the Pope we are talking about. This is not the ethical standards Pope Francis has for himself, right? Number 3, the church would have a strong resistance. Panel, we have already noticed that how the church is not really in the favor of Pope Francis completely, right? And if you are able to do something unconstitutional, which completely destroys everything which Christianity and Pope has ever stood for, you basically invite even further backlash, which somehow the government may just seem to care too much about, right? So the reason that this doesn't really happen, right? But even if, and let's take them at the very best case again, let's say you are able to appoint someone who is liberal. 3 reasons again, that is still useless. And this takes down both OG and CG completely from the debate, right? Because 1, that person would have their own identity. Ankit literally talked about how every single Pope in history has one thing they have stood for. For Pope Francis, that one thing they have stood for is environment and family. For the next Pope, it will not be the thing. It is really like hyper-reaching to speculate that the next Pope would have same amount of ideas. He would want his own legacy. He would not want to create something which would be attributed to Pope Francis forever, right? Number 2, you are talking about these people. You are talking about the next Pope coming in a different scenario, right? Ankit talked a lot about what the current scenario of Christianity is. You have insult of sexual assault against you. You have allegations. You have Christianity being separated into different global sects. For the next pope, priorities are different. That is the simple thing they don't understand. And they think that every single pope has just one aspect, which is Christianity. Even if that is true, the team which tells you what Pope Francis' unique interests are is the one winning the debate. Because as we are saying, this is not a random pope. This is Pope Francis. We are talking about this is what we need to stand for in the debate. But even if all this is true, right? The second pope completely sacrifices himself for the agenda of Pope Francis. We still think he will not be able to succeed, right? Because you change the entire signaling of what a pope stands for. A pope is not an eternal person who literally is able to rule till his life. A pope is someone who can retire. Back-to-back popes have retired. And OG says they don't care about it, but that's literally the point. You completely change the signaling that pope is an eternal person who will forever be the servant of God, who will forever be able to rule upon you, right? When you change this notion, if a pope comes up who has very progressive views, with the conservative Christianity that doesn't agree with, he will be removed. There are procedures now. There is precedence now. There is some, because now Pope Francis will be seen as a narrative that if you are progressive enough, you have to step down. This will not be viewed as him stepping down due to generosity. This will be viewed as him stepping down because he couldn't bring the positive reform. What does he do to the further pope? Anyone who even tries to do this is likely to be removed or not be successful. This means they completely lose the debate because their opinions are unbiased. But most importantly, we is the only team which tells you what Pope Francis' unique contributions to the debate is. It's not accountability as OG says. It's not health as CG says. It's not just general positive reforms as O says. It's specifically introducing marriage, introducing family, introducing his ideas about environment. I can talk to he is the first person in history of Pope to introduce this idea that environment or sustainability is one of the core concepts to be one of the five core concepts of whole church doctrine, right? That is what to the extent he cares about. We tell you three reasons. This is the most important thing for him, right? One, he is the first person ever to do this, right? Two, he has literally faced enormous amount of resistance against doing this. Three, he's willing to completely change doctrines and research this. Understand, panel, that Pope is a very spiritual person. For him to do something which changes the doctrine of something he deeply believes in, he has sacrificed his entire life for, means that fundamental thing matters the most to him in the entire life, right? That means that for him, the environmental sustainability matters. We also give you that we are also only the team to give you a mechanism of how these changes happen, right? Pope went to UN, Pope went to France, Pope went to different regions. Pope changed the doctrine to include climate change as one of the 5 important doctrines. Pope has introduced a new concept where bishops meet every day. Bishop meets every day to discuss about family. He has fundamentally changed it. This is the mechanism which this changes happen. And this is a mechanism for him for which he needs to be empowered, right? As the only team which talks to you about this, we already win this debate. But let's see how we tackle OO and OG respectively. OG first talks about accountability, no understanding of why that matters to Pope. Then they talk about next Pope would be likely true. We tell you that is not going to happen. And third, they talk about heaven, right? Pope violating the doctrine is the easiest way for him to not go to heaven. Literally, Christ said that Pope has to serve till the left end of the life. That is what Christians believe. Him doing that means that he's actively choosing to not go to heaven if that concept even matters to him to begin with. Number 3, even if that concept matters, right? That is heaven. The things which give you to heaven are a lot of things, right? That different changes can happen for them. Number 4, they said that he needs to do good to go to heaven. He's already doing a lot of good. He's doing reforms which he believes is more important than the traditional Christian doctrines which were coming for 4,000 years. That is the only good he needs to do to go to heaven, right? So we talk about O talked a lot of progressive reforms and all those. They didn't tell him which reforms matters the most to him, but what makes Pope Francis unique? They didn't give a mechanism of this. But more importantly, we are the only side which engages with the closing team at their best case, right? Even if our next Pope is elected, why does Pope Francis still lose? Why does Pope Francis not better? Finally, even if we can't ignore all this, let's take you at their best ever case, right? Pope has to retire. But that is not going to be today, because today Christianity is in the worst position ever. If Pope retires today, the instability is going to be extreme. Everything he cares about in Christianity is gone. The next person has more these things to care about, more backlash, and everything Pope cares about is gone. So we tell you, Pope shouldn't resign. And even if he should resign, this is not the time. It is Pope Francis. It is 2023. It is not a random Pope. It is not a random year. Very, very proud to oppose. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you two very